So, welcome everyone to Savvy Contemporary. Many of you were here already for the tour, so I won't say too much about Savvy, except that we're a volunteer-run, non-profit space here, obviously in Berlin. And we do a number of things. We do some exhibitions, including the United Screens exhibition, of which this talk is sort of a satellite. And we do a discursive program, which this talk, again, is sort of a satellite of that. Basically, United Screens is about expanding the idea of film culture to include the global South. And the first case study is the Indian film scene. And that comes from the fact that one of the co-curators of United Screen, Abhishek Nilamber, is from India and embedded in that scene, but also it seemed like, why not? That's a good place to start. Our next chapter is going to be in Cairo, Egypt, but before then, we kind of wanted to sort of expand between, film culture, which was the magazine from Jonas Mekas in New York, and which was covering mostly Western film cultures, and expand also from this case study of India to think, okay, well, what else can we see? So our first Invocations, which is what we call these sort of exhibition-linked discursive programs, was about building film cultures on the African continent and beyond. And that was on Friday night with Talal Afifi and Viola Shafiq, Dr. Viola Shafiq, in which we talked about Talal's project, the Sudan Film Factory, and about Viola's involvement in Egypt and beyond in terms of building documentary film practices. So tonight we have the second Invocations program called Infiltrating German Film Culture. And I have to give credit where credit's due. That's actually Amelia's term. So originally we had something like, I don't even remember what it was because it was kind of lame. But and when we met and we were talking, Amelia brought up this idea of this sort of either her work or a possible practice is one of infiltrating, and it just really sat well with what we're trying to do here at Savvy in terms of embed ourselves in a culture that's not necessarily that is ours to some degree. I'm also, sorry, my name, P.S. Chakraverti-Wuerthwein, so I'm also half German, half Indian. And so for me, this was another reason why this topic was of particular interest, to basically say, we are German, but even if we're hyphenated German and we're being pushed to the margins, that it's still important to claim that space, etc. So it's a long introduction. And anyway, I want to thank our panelists today. We have Oliver, so from my left, I guess you're right, Oliver Hardt, who's an independent filmmaker who's done documentaries for the likes of Arte, as well as commercial videos for the likes of Mercedes-Benz, and for the German Design Award. We have Verena von Stackelberg, who is the founder and director of Wolf Kino in Neukölln, the sort of cafe cinema, which she'll soon tell you more about, and Amelia Umuhire, who's an independent filmmaker who's best known for her YouTube web series Polyglot. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the three of them to basically introduce themselves a little bit. And actually, no, one last thing before that, just so that you get a bit of a sense of what the conversation will be about. We have sort of three acts. The first one is formation, in which I'm going to be asking them to give a bit of an introduction into where they position themselves within German film culture, how they got involved in film, etc. And then the second act is distribution, which is very much linked to what United Screens is about, both sort of forming networks of south to south distribution, and of sort of rethinking how we can be distributing films in a way that's more ethical and that actually works for independent filmmakers as well as blockbuster filmmakers. And then the final sort of section is spaces, which is about the kind of new spaces, whether it's like Savvy or like Wolf Kino, that are being created to show new and interesting types of films. So that's basically our roadmap for today, but we also invite absolutely questions from you all as we go along, and then also we'll make some time at the end. Yeah, can I just ask someone from the team to turn the audio on those two off? Thanks. Yeah, so maybe a moment. So does anyone want to volunteer to begin with introducing him or herself? Yeah, you were volunteered, so.
Volunteer. Okay, first of all, thank you, Pia and Savvy Contemporary for the invitation to this panel. I'm a director and filmmaker based in Frankfurt, and I have a major interest in what we call arts and culture in documentary film, which is a wide field, a wide range of topics, but I focus on architecture, contemporary art, and design in a way. But I have a kind of second interest in filmmaking, and this is about how to say, the representation of minorities in the media itself, but also in other fields. And in some projects, and I'm lucky that all these interests come together in one film. An example would be my latest film called The Black Museum. It's a film about the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. I've been working on this topic for like 5 or 6 years. I did several films about it, but now it has come kind of to kind of a conclusion with this film, The Black Museum, which was produced by Arte and for Arte. And The Black Museum is a kind of, how do you say, focal point where most of my interests come together. So it's about architecture, it's about black culture, it's about African American history, it's about, well, it's kind of a very meaningful story of success and a meaningful story of persistence, I would say. It took them 100 years to get this museum. And so this are kind of the topics I'm working on in my documentary work. I think that's for now. Yeah. You volunteer?
No, I'll pass on. Okay. So a brief introduction. I also wanted to extend my biggest thanks for inviting me here. It feels like coming home in a way, actually, because what you exhibit here really left a big impression on me, and I feel it's kind of like it's the seed that started my entire working life, kind of, which is Jonas Mekas' writings, his passion, his encouragement to embrace the imperfect and to launch forward and not be afraid of failure. So all these kind of values were given to me through the different writings that you exhibit here also, and then it feels really nice to arrive here tonight, so thank you. Yes, briefly, so I founded Wolf kind of 2012 or something. I mean, way too long ago. It took me ages to set it up. It was a disused space, and it now is a cinema and film center. The idea is that it's not just a cinema and it's not just a production space and it's not just a bar, but it is a circular venue that encourages the dialogue and the exchange between filmmakers and film lovers and everybody else who dares to enter this adventure called cinema. So in brief, this is what it is.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm a huge Savvy fan, and so I'm happy to be here. And yeah, so thanks. Well, I started like in 2015. I put out a web series called Polyglots on YouTube, and it's a 3-episode web series about the lives of young black artists in Berlin and in London. One episode is set in London, and the other 2 are set in Berlin. And so that was like the launch of my career as a filmmaker, was through that series. So after Polyglot, I did like a short film that was more distributed in galleries and museums, and especially North America. And and recently I've ventured into radio, and I've done like a radio feature. So I'm kind of all over the place with my work, but yeah, so that's.
Great, thank you. So one of the first questions, so you've kind of covered my first question, which is, what you're kind of doing, each of you, what you're doing in film. Another key question was just sort of to get a bit of the terrain of what German film culture is now. If maybe each of you could answer the question of how you'd characterize your position within or in relation to German film culture.
I don't know if I'd even consider myself like a part of German film culture, whatever that is, you know, like, because like starting out on the internet, it wasn't really work that was linked to Germany. Like Germany was just the backdrop of it, actually, like in Polyglot, Berlin is just the backdrop for these characters. So it's never been, I wouldn't like say that it's part of German film, and it wasn't received that way either. Like most of the reception was from outside of Germany. And so in a sense, like I honestly don't see myself as part of the German film culture, because it's never, we haven't met yet, you know. So yeah.
I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up, because it came out when we first met, and I was asking you, okay, well, you know, what was the reception? And you mentioned that it was, you did have, when you were watching on YouTube and you were checking out who's watching, et cetera, you were checking out your demographics and the statistics, that you did see that a number of people from Germany were watching. And so I'd be curious, actually, if you had a sense of the maybe informal reception of the series and how that did, you know, maybe if it's not affecting German film culture in the sort of big letters or in terms of German film industry, but if you had an idea of its effect on people who are watching it in Germany.
I think like there was a huge misunderstanding, I think, in Germany, like from the way it was received, because it came out in 2015, and it was like when the whole migration debate was starting, and but at the time, like when people were still a bit friendly about it, so a lot of people understood it more as a series about refugees. Like that's the way it was perceived in German media. Like the coverage it got from what was it again, Deutschlandfunk Nova and stuff like that. And like in Germany, people focused a lot on the fact that it's a series about people who migrated to Germany, and they kind of immediately labeled the characters as refugees, which was never like mentioned. So it kind of, it was, in a way, that's like the way it was understood here. And most of the people who watch the series, but it's in English and it's in French, so it's not in German. So to be fair, like it's not even in the German language. So, but most people who watched it were more from the black diaspora, like from the UK, the US, Canada, France, and Belgium, and then Germany. Like it was. So it was clear that the main audience of the series was not in Germany. Yeah.
I guess going back to the question of your position, Verena.
So I studied in London, and I began working in cinemas in London. So when I moved to Berlin in 2008, I mean, I never thought about like entering the German film industry or you know, I didn't think of like cinema and filmmaking so in terms of borders or nationality so much. So when I came here, I was very much interested in my position in finding solutions and ways to keep cinema alive and to keep film going alive and to support independent filmmakers. So this was always my approach. It wasn't about entering a certain industry or scene. But there's, of course, a lot to be said about the film industry, and I do consider myself more on the margins of it, but maybe because I think that's a good point to observe and to try and find solutions sometimes, but it's not because of anything else. I mean, I naturally prefer the position of the underdog, whether that's in football or in cinema or in anything. Like I always find it more interesting to kind of see where you can create or find friction and launch forward. So that's a bit up.
What was the question?
The question was basically where you position yourself within or in relationship to German film culture.
Yeah, you sent that to me before, and it's really a hard question. most of my films are co-financed by Arte, which is, as you all know, a French-German joint venture for better television. But at the same time, most of my films are also not in the German language. They are like, well, in English most of the time. I shoot in America and elsewhere. I'm also not sure. I think I'm kind of part of German film culture, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that I work at the margins, because when you say someone is working at the margins, you assume that there is something like a center, and I don't see that actually. I see that German film culture is a kind of a patchwork of many different interests, economic powers, but I don't really see a mainstream or a center of German film. It's also, if you look at the funding situation, it's scattered all over the country. You don't have a centralized funding like in other countries. You have and especially like in the last 10 years, where the technical equipment has become so affordable. So I think there are a lot of film cultures, but I don't see a German film culture, and that's what I think, that we are the German film culture in a way, because it's like scattered all over the place, and it's good that it's like that, I would say. So, and I cannot really say what my position is in it. I like working with these kind of budgets I have for my documentary films. But I mean, compared to, I don't know, other films, they are low and incomparable to people who are working like on a base of doing everything on their own. Maybe they are high budget, but I cannot really position myself in this within this question. Yeah.
I would just like to elaborate on that, because I see what you say when you say you feel there's no center, but I just wanted to explain why I feel that, because I think it's maybe interesting to think of that. For me, when now that I'm here and Wolf is open, I do notice like that there are limits. Like I can sort of go this far and not further. For example, when I apply for funding, when I want to do distribution of films, I'm very clearly shown that this is not wanted by the funding bodies. And if I look at how, for example, the Deutsche Filmakademie works and what kind of filmmakers they promote and support, and also this sort of like network of cinemas and distributors and funders, I get angry just thinking about it, actually, because it is a very close circle, actually. And the more I learn about it, the more I see how it is. And yeah.
That's one of the things that I found interesting in an interview you had given, Verena, that you were saying basically that one of the places that you want Wolf to fit in is a lot of these, because you work also with Berlinale talents, for example, and you've given a couple of panels on community cinema, and one of these things you were saying in this interview was that you want Wolf Kino to be able to pick up some of the films from festivals such as the Berlinale that don't get distributors, that don't get immediately snapped up by a commercial distributor. So maybe if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that and how that element of Wolf Kino.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give films a platform that don't get a platform otherwise, for example. But also I would like to, it is difficult in Germany to distribute films because of the way that the funding bodies work, and without the funding you can barely distribute films unless you do it in your free time and you accept that you don't get any money for it. And so this means that the categories for which you can apply for funding already erases a whole number of countries from this world, because these are not applicable for funding. So, or eligible for funding, I mean. So this in itself is, I think, highly difficult, and there are a few smaller distributor funds that are given to films that do not come from the selected few countries, but it's not easy to get that money either, and then it's very little. So This is one thing, and what I'm trying to do in order to kind of go the complications and also not exhaust ourselves by just doing something where we don't earn any money and that can potentially also put in danger Wolf itself, because we have to also pay our rent. We created a label called Steppenwolf, and within this label we screen films at Wolf over a prolonged period of time. And if other cinemas want to also show the film, we make the film available. So this is something that we do in terms of like trying to give films without distributors a platform. And then sometimes we also distribute films. So for example, now we were able to distribute Endless Poetry by Jodorowsky because the producer asked us if we can do this, and he had funds from media that he transferred to us, so we could pay a little bit of money to make the film available. And it started last Thursday, so just now with 27 cinemas. So it's really nice to see that there are like little successes here and there, and I hope that we can create a level of trust with the audience that will give the films the attention that they deserve without us having to invest money that we don't have in marketing and advertising. So it's the idea is that we try and create a community around Steppenwolf who say like, oh yeah, I get what you're trying to do, and I know that what you provide is quality. So we'll just go because of the label rather than because they saw an advertisement somewhere.
Great, thanks, and congratulations. I actually wanted to transition there to actually ask you, Oliver, about Signature Films, and maybe speaking a little bit about that as a production network and as something that's how that came about.
Signature Films basically is a label for my activities in film, but it's also a production network. I mean, it's a handful of friends I used to work with for a very long time, like 10 or 15 years or longer. And well, it's a kind of network that works in the way that we are doing documentary films together, but also commercial work. That means that we have like these things that are really well paid, where the cameraman and the editor really get their money. And on the other hand, we have projects that are kind of funded, but often not enough. So you always have this kind of conflict when you ask people to work for you, and you have to say, okay, I can pay, but I can only pay that much. And it's a kind of balancing in this. Yeah, it has become a system of balancing this out a little bit, so that we know we have projects with money and we have projects without money or with little money. So this is kind of how it evolved. It was not planned like this, but this is how it actually evolved. And originally, I just wanted to have a name for projects that was not my own name as a person, but something that kind of sounded like a big company or something, you know. So and I have a lot to do with, for example, American institutions, and so it's better to just write them under Signature Films than saying, "Hi, I'm Oliver Hardt." So that was the original reason for the label and for the name, and it has become something else. And I think in the future it will change again. But that's basically what it is. Yeah, a label and a production network. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And this was one of the things that sort of interested me in all of your practices, was basically this combining the commercial element and the artistic work to basically to make. And I had wanted to ask you as well, Oliver. So you had mentioned before you're interested in design and etc. And I'd wanted to ask, if this isn't too rude of a question, to what degree things like commercials for Mercedes, to what degree is that fitting within your sort of creative mission, and to what degree is that something that you're taking on because it helps pay for your other projects, such as the documentaries?
Yeah. I mean, you learn a lot when you do these projects where you have a certain amount of time, but you can say what you want to have and so on. And there's a high pressure. You learn to work with that. But I don't see that there are too many artistic connection between the one and the other. You learn certain things like precision and also keeping budgets, yeah. But I don't see that there's really kind of an artistic kind of connection between both works, because they are so different. Also, the way of working is completely different, and the commercial jobs are really like assignments where I got hired for, as a director, and my documentary works are like 2 years of development, yeah, where I do research, where I travel, where I talk to people, and then form a proposition of that, and then go to Arte or to my commissioning editor, and then I do these 3 or 4 steps until you finally get a go. So that means 3 years. 3 weeks would be great. 3 years of work before you actually start shooting. So I mean, that's completely different thing. But what I can say, because we are talking about infiltrating, which is a kind of interesting term, that I thought that in some of these documentaries that I use really conventional forms as a kind of Trojan horse to get my themes into art, for example. Yeah, so that is kind of, yeah, I don't know if it's a trick, but that worked out in a way. So they know that I'm making, well, I don't scare people with too much experiment when I do documentaries, and so they're fine with that. I have a certain way of storytelling, and the storytelling always got something to do with what I want to tell and with the content. But yeah, it's always like I keep the format. Let's say it that way. I'm not let the format implode or something. Yeah, it's really I keep the format, but within the format, I'm trying to tell the stories that wouldn't be told otherwise. Yeah, and maybe that's kind of explains my relationship with this. Working with an institution like Arte, but at the same time have the topics I really want to work with or tell the story about. Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's the way to say it. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd wanted to ask also Amelia, because your latest project was, as you were saying, a radio. Does one say radio show? Radio feature, yeah? Radio feature. And then before that you did visuals for the Miss Lauryn Hill tour. And maybe if you could speak also with that same question that I was asking of Oliver, how do you see this sort of balance between more creative, more sort of what we would consider in the art world more conventionally creative work, and then more commercial work, and kind of how you move through these spaces?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know if I've like reached the commercial side yet. You know, I've never like even now with the radio feature, it comes from a very like non-commercial German taxpayer-funded radio station, so it's not like highly commercial. But like the stuff I do always reflects like the spaces I'm in at the same time. You know, so. In a sense, like after Polyglot, there was this question of like where do I want to go with the work? Like, I mean, there was a whole moment of YouTube creators becoming like doing content for HBO. I mean, you've got like Issa Rae, you've got Cécile Emeke. There's a whole movement of like people who came from YouTube who then went on to do commercial work. And so like because I'm located in Germany, I'm not kind of part of that movement, although my work is part of that like movement, but I'm not like in that industry. And so in a way I had just like to ask myself like what can I do next, and so I had a documentary in mind, but yeah, as Oliver was saying, like it takes ages to fund it and then to kind of to just get going. So when I got the opportunity to do a radio feature, I thought like, okay, I can actually tell the story in radio as well. So I've got 54 minutes, which would be like a TV film as well, or a TV documentary. So for me, it was just, okay, I'm going to do it. So I get like, I get the training. So I stay working and I do the research, because the process behind it was not that different from a film. It was just that we didn't shoot, but like the interviews and the research and everything was kind of the same process I would have gone through for a film. So so I just I realized like in the last few years that there is not like this one career that I can just, this blueprint that I can follow, like and that in a way I'm made up of so many different like identities and also regions and cultural contexts, that also my work has to kind of reflect that as well. So like doing the visuals for Miss Lauryn Hill, and then at the same time, because it came out while the radio feature came out as well, and feels like just being on several, like the spectrum is quite, I just want to do everything that seems like fun to me in a way. So, yeah.
Seems pretty reasonable. Yeah. And kind of on that same line, or on that same narrative, maybe you could speak a little bit about moving to this sort of spaces section of the conversation, about being between Kigali and Berlin, and about also working in or existing in cinema spaces or film culture there.
Well, the way I started out, I was working for film festivals, first for the Rwanda Film Festival, and then I was working for the African Film Festival in Berlin, Afrikamera. And so in a way, like that's how I got into film, through this like African film lens. Before that, I was kind of really very oblivious to the existence of African film. Unfortunately, I was raised in Germany. Like I really didn't know a lot about like African film. So in a way, my cinematic work, or I would place that more in this kind of African film tradition more than I would place it in the German film tradition. So what was the question again? Sorry.
How do you see your moving between?
Sure. Sorry. Again, I think it just mimics like the reality, like my personal reality. So like in Polyglot as well, although it's not set in Kigali, Kigali does play a role in the second episode, where it's about like being homesick and kind of, it's the summer, you can't get like the money for a ticket, so you kind of, you're homesick, but you kind of deal with it in the space you're in. But at the same time, like you're not really in that, like you're not really in Berlin, you're still like in Kigali with your like thoughts and feelings. And for the second film, like after Polyglot, I shot a short film in Kigali, and and I have like a small network there of like just a small team, and I shot that in Kigali, and it also was screened in Kigali and in Goma as well. And I've tried to kind of stay connected to that, because that's also like what the audience I have in mind is, more like this kind of Rwandese millennial diaspora and non-diaspora kind of people. So, but then the way it got like the films so far, also Polyglot and Mugabo, which is the second short film, they all screened more in the US than in Europe, for example, which I still find weird. Like I had never had it on my map actually, but it's kind of where the whole like black film movement is centered, I guess. So that's also why. But so I try to work in Kigali as well. For the radio feature, I was working in Kigali too, and doing like projects with the Goethe Institute, and kind of staying connected to that, like through all kinds of collaborations and
So so that was one of the things that actually also I wanted to talk about these north south south north connections, whether it's the Goethe Institute or the Berlinale, etc., and sort of how you're maneuvering that. Because on the flip side, I mean, when we had talked before, you were saying that the experience with the Goethe Institute was not all positive because there were a number of sort of outside advisors who didn't know as much about the local context. Am I remembering this? Maybe you want to expand. Yeah. So that's of course one example, and maybe more immediately understandable or immediately recognizable example of this sort of north-south relationship not working. But then I was interested, actually, Verena, one of the panels you did was with, among others, I don't remember who the third panelist was, but it was with Yusuf Shasli from Zawiya Cinema and Archive in Cairo, which is also a cinema and archive that we've worked with at Savvy. And you were, if I remember correctly, the panel was about community cinemas, and so maybe you could talk a little bit about that experience and whether you view a possibility of having a productive exchange from,
Yes, definitely. I know Yusuf from Zawiya. I've been to Cairo many times. Father of my son is a filmmaker from Cairo who also built a Cinematech in Cairo. So we met over this process where we both were building cinemas in respective cities, and we've had a lot of conversations about how I've definitely been very inspired by the way that Cinematech has been set up, and I have a huge respect also for what Yusuf did with Zawiya, which is basically so clever. Like there weren't many independent cinemas in Cairo, and he comes from a filmmaking dynasty, so he is definitely like a descendant of Youssef Shaheen, and his mother is a film producer and so on. But anyway, there is definitely not enough cinemas who show art house and independent cinema films, and he got basically the smallest screen of a multiplex that had an entrance through the previous fire exit of the cinema. So the Blockbuster cinema has a main entrance on a busy street, and the independent cinema is in the same building, but you wouldn't know, and it's in a tiny alley, and it enters through the fire exit, so to say. And so when I've been thinking about like how Wolf and what responsibility Wolf has in being where it is, and building a cinema in a neighborhood that is, is surrounded by people from all over the world who have different needs and different desires, and like what our responsibilities are as this kind of community space, then I was definitely also very inspired by the Egyptian peers, so to say, and also by many other cinemas around the world. I've also been very inspired by Metrograph, because they were in New York establishing a cinema not like a few years ago, and they mainly just show 35mm prints, which is great and inspiring to see, because we see that the analog film still has a huge role, and it actually draws people into the cinema when they know that films are shot analog. So in terms of finding or thinking about spaces, I very much see Wolf as part of like a wider film community, no matter where these communities are in the world, as long as we are connected through this desire of fostering a stronger relationship with independent film and film history. But also we have a huge responsibility within our very kind of like immediate community, and there's still a lot of work to be done there for sure. Like we work with children and kids, and this is maybe for me the most important part of it all, because these are the only, or I feel my responsibility is that we connect with people that wouldn't otherwise watch the films that we show, but also at the same time show films that otherwise we wouldn't show without this connection. So trying to like have an like a mutual relationship with the neighborhood, but that requires a lot of work, because it's easy to just serve your immediate surroundings and the people that are anyway already converted to be dedicated to cinema. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, what were some of the challenges you've faced doing that, trying to create that kind of community cinema, and if there's something that you were particularly, a program or something that you were particularly proud of that actually worked to do exactly that, whether it's distributing something that wouldn't have been otherwise distributed or reaching out to the community in a way that wouldn't otherwise have worked. Yeah.
So distributing what otherwise wouldn't get distributed, unfortunately, is very easy because there's just so much great work that doesn't get shown or seen. The thing I'm most proud of, but that like requires I cannot rest on any laurels at all, and like I'm just proud that we managed to get this off the ground from the very beginning with the thanks to funding, is the work that we do with the school kids. So we worked with a group of 13 to 16-year-old kids from a gymnasium from the neighborhood who all have migrant backgrounds, but all born in the neighborhood, and all the first generation of kids that go into higher education. And they were the first children that we worked with, and we did Super 8 workshops with them, virtual reality workshops. They curated their own film festivals and programs, and really started to treat Wolf like their second home. And this is for me the most beautiful experience that we had. And I hope that some of them maybe end up working with me or with cinema or make films. And this has been definitely a very good experience. But the challenge, for example, is that I thought, great, we show a short film program that the kids have curated. So basically the parents will come, and we also get to have families from the neighborhood that otherwise wouldn't enter Wolf. But no one came. And it's so naive, because of course the kids don't tell their parents what they do, because also they selected films that are pretty cutting edge. So they wouldn't want their parents to see what they are watching, because otherwise they couldn't come back to Wolf. So it's very, things like that. And we need to learn how we can kind of like commute better on this level. Yeah, just a small example.
I have to ask, what kind of films did they select? Like Clockwork Orange, or?
So there were short films, but short films that also deal with violence and sex and all kinds of things, that not the most brutal or sexual, but definitely featured in them.
That means like things they know from YouTube, and their parents just doesn't know they know it. Exactly. Yeah? Okay, understand. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to actually ask as well, Amelia, you've worked with kids or with younger screenwriters in Kigali, right? That's what we, in Goma. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and also, because I remember when we spoke, you talked about that being somewhere you'd rather focus your energies than the film scene in Berlin. Yeah.
Well, I started out like in a program like that, actually. So really cool at Ballhaus Nauninstraße. They had like a Kiez-Monatsschau, and so it was like a program where you could come and like just do film, and you had an editor, so you would like learn how it actually goes, and kind of to take away this fear of, making a film is not that hard. Actually, it just people who make it seem hard, but it's just so programs like that are just. I mean, I don't think I would have started without having that kind of access to it. And so I tried to kind of do the same work in Rwanda, or like we did a project in the Democratic Republic of Congo last year, and it was a web series. So yeah, I was there for 2 months, and we had a group of Rwandese and Congolese like young people who wanted to get into film, and so. Yeah, I try to do that, like to do projects like that, because for a long time I was really like, I felt like film, I wanted to do film, but I never I was waiting for this kind of invitation or something that kind of takes away this fear, and that makes it like, yeah, just accessible. So that was a project we did. So it was the concept was just to kind of live in Goma for a while and find out like what the life in Goma is about, what the people, like the young students wanted to, what kind of stories they wanted to tell, and also to kind of get away from this cliche stories that often come out of these workshops, because a lot of the times like this, it was funded from the Goethe Institute, and a lot of the times like when the money is coming from outside, they often also well, they have certain conditions and they have like stories and topics they're now focused on, and so a lot of the times the people who then come to learn film are quite, from the beginning you're kind of forced to serve a narrative that has nothing to do with your own. So I try to kind of find the stories they really wanted to tell, and not just like to kind of serve this NGO narrative. And I find that's like actually the biggest, one of the big challenges in filmmaking in that region, because it's like there is no state funding, so the money comes from British Council, from Goethe Institute, from Institut Français, and it comes like with topics like gender-based violence or like NGO topics, and it's not like everyone doesn't want to make a film about gender-based violence, you know, like, so a lot of the films that actually come from those workshops are films that are then shown around like to kind of justify a certain budget, or so it's not really sometimes I feel like it doesn't aim at like training people in expressing themselves artistically. It's just more of kind of a colonial practice of like, you know, enlightening the people by, you know, so I kind of like try to subvert that a bit. So we made a web series that was more experimental, and that was about like just the little phenomenons of that region and stuff like that. So yeah, that's how I've been trying to do it.
And could you imagine doing that kind of a workshop in Berlin as well, or do you feel like you want to focus your that part of your practice more in Rwanda and in I guess the Congo as well?
I really don't mind. It's more about like, you know, getting it to people who feel like who don't see themselves kind of represented in that scene, who are like who are afraid of entering like you know, art, and there are a lot of things that really hold you back, I think, and we don't really think about it because we're also part of like you know, people who consume art regularly and who make it part of their lives. But you know, some people want to participate in that but are held back because of these like invisible walls, you know. And I think that so I'm not really a fan of that, and I really tried, like even with Polyglot, a lot of people didn't really get it because they thought like it's on YouTube, so it's like a makeup tutorial or whatever. So there's a lot of like snobism like going around, and so you have to kind of I really try to not like tap into that a lot, and to have like the work be accessible everywhere, so like that at the same time it can be on YouTube while it's in galleries, while it's like in film festivals and stuff like that, because I think that really invites a lot of people to also make film, to also like be part of that conversation. And I think that's what's happening through like all these web series and stuff like that. A lot of people feel encouraged to to tell the story and to like kind of frame it the way they would frame it, and not to depend on others to do that for them. So yeah.
Thanks. I wanted to take a moment now to ask for questions, comments, or reactions from the audience. Should there be any? No? Okay, then I'll just ask. Yeah, please.
Because I think what you mentioned is very important, and I like a lot what you say, making work accessible everywhere at the same time to everyone, and kind of even when you know you're exhibiting in a gallery, to still have the work shown in other platforms, I think is really the way forward. And it's very difficult to make people listen to that. There's a lot of how do I say, like there are many people from the industry, so to say, that don't want that to happen. Like they're very scared of this, and I understand this entire conflict, and it's an important one wherever you are working in the field of media right now, is that idea of Netflix, for example, is difficult, that Netflix doesn't want films to be shown in festivals and just have them, if they pay for the production of the film, have them only seen on their platform. So of course I also understand people, cinema owners, distributors who say like we have to be very careful in how we present films and where we show them, and have these windows so that for 6 months you are not allowed to show your film anywhere else other than a cinema and so on. But I believe that we are no longer in control of this, and the more open we make our work and the more available we make it, the better. I think it's the only way to counter this development, and why not embrace it? I think what you do is really good, so that's just a comment.
Yeah. Here, I'll just give you the just for the
Can it come here? Yeah, good. I don't have a question. I have an observation, and I would like to hear more of your reflection on it. While you were talking, I picked up a few very important issues. One was the spectatorship and the globalist spectatorship. You mentioned that you don't consider yourself within the German culture of filmmaking, obviously, and you identified with the margin. And you're working in America with Arte money, which is quite interesting, and not PBS. And these are the issues that you mentioned, and I felt like you're addressing a global audience, and you are making films or making films available for a more global audience, whether they are interested in the mainstream or not. And also the other thing that all of you touched upon was the budget and the funding bodies who decide what sort of subject they want to pay money for, and then the artist relatively has to cater to their interest and what they define. And then by doing that, they have to covet as well in order to get their own work done and get their integrity also valued. And the other one, which is an issue that I personally grapple with quite a lot, is the tyranny of language. And is there such thing or not? The films, you're making the films in English language, thank God, I can understand most of it. And then you don't make films in German, as I understand. Yeah, English and French. So my question here is probably this: is it important? Aren't we dealing with screen cultures and visual cultures as artists, and then language? How much that language make your film accessible, not accessible? The definition that you have for your project, for your artistic expressions, how much of that is bound by a particular language or not? I'm not clear, sorry. I'm all over the place, but your talks were very inciting, so this is basically...
I can try and answer part of that. When I do a film with an American topic like this museum, of course I film it there mostly. The architect lives in London, but I mean it's basically mostly filmed in the US, but it's shown in Europe. So if it's on screen at Arte, it is the TV premiere, and then it's 3 months in their online mediathek by now in 5 different languages. Like in German, we do a German version of the film. Then subtitled or language? It depends on. In this case, it was voiceover, because it's an interview-based film, and there's a lot of text, and we don't want people to have to read for an hour, so we decided for voiceover. But then there's a French version, which is also a French voiceover. Then there is a Spanish, a Polish, and I don't remember but there are different language versions, subtitles or subtitled or voiceover, and it can be seen there for 3 months, which is a good thing on the one hand. On the other hand, it means because they don't really pay. It used to be 7 days, and now it's 3 months, but that doesn't lead to a higher budget or something. So, but I agree with it. It's a good kind of distribution, so everyone in Europe can watch the film. Next step would be the world distribution and the American distribution, which are not that easy, but also festivals and so on and so on. Yeah? So that the films are visible in a way and they are accessible, but still kind of restricted. That got something to do, of course, with the rights situation. Often it got to do with music, which is a big problem for filmmakers. Yeah, so I mean, maybe that had answered a part of what your question was, right? And maybe
yeah, thank you for that question, because I think like the way you voiced it, like the tyranny of language, because it is like with the series Polyglot, like it's about people who kind of exist in those culture, like in that space where you just speak different languages. You speak a different language at home. You enter the bus, you speak German. You meet your friends, you speak English, and da da da. So that kind of world, like, and I think that's like what it's becoming, anyways. And for me, like, it's always been a bit like a restriction to actually do something in German. Like, it's if I imagined, like, I don't know what world that would play in. To be honest, like, it wouldn't. It would have to be completely fiction for it to be set in a world where it's completely in German. And so I kind of, like, with my work, I also try to use a language that is accessible as well. Like, I don't know, like, you can check out Polyglot on YouTube, it's still online. And like the second episode was in French, and it was an episode about people who migrated to Germany, but like who speak also in a language that is not their first language. So the whole dialogue is in French, but it's between two people who don't speak French as their mother tongue. So, and I think, and now like with the radio feature, which I had to do in German because it was for a German radio station, but all the interviews were in French and in Kinyarwanda, and yeah, I think that, yeah, in French and Kinyarwanda. So the German just becomes like a way of getting it done, but it's not really the language it's thought in. Like, it was just a voiceover, and I really like reluctantly, and I tried to keep it as short as possible as well, to have like the original language flow through, because that's also where the information is and the emotion is and everything. So yeah, I find it I don't know, like it's very restrictive to have to like work in the German language for me, because it really doesn't reflect the reality. And it's also that's also how I look at German film, although it's one of my languages, but I still it doesn't feel like it's the world I live in. Like it's a completely different world. When I look at German TV, it's I mean, but I don't think that the German they speak in German TV is the Germans speak. Like, it's also it exists in a different fictionalized world. Like, it's not even yeah, but it's a very interesting question. And
yeah, I also liked your summary, so thank you for that. It's kind of like a good point of view and very concise, actually, how you summed it up. Just about briefly, because we're kind of dependent on what comes our way, what language versions are available for us to show at Wolf, but we try, for example, if there is a German film with English subtitles, we'll show it this way, and if there is another language, so say Arabic, for example, we also try and like have different slots. So we have Arabic with English subtitles in one time slot, and Arabic with German in another time slot. So we try and make it available in as many languages as possible. But what the biggest challenge here is still, for me as a cinema maker, the fact that many people are used to dubbed films. And that's really a problem, because it breaks my heart to watch a film dubbed. But sometimes we do. For example, there's a beautiful kids film. It's not a kids film, but it's great for kids also. And this is, the original language is Catalan, and so we show it also dubbed. for the kids, and then in the evening we show it subtitled. But yeah, it is a challenge.
Do we have another? Yes.
Thank you. Hi. I'm very, very happy to participate in this discussion. Fact is that I know two of the panelists, Amelia and Verena, and I find it interesting, this ongoing conversation also within this exhibition on domination. Actually, I think this is what it's about, the core of it. And as Amelia was talking about her project in Goma, I was thinking that actually film as itself is a part of domination. I mean, the production process, the equipment and all that. So that I was thinking of, it's not so easy to access to it because it's also, you need money actually to get you there. But then you can fill in whole venues with people because you don't need to be so sophisticated to get to reach people. And even if you are, you reach them with everything that cinema is having inside of its nature. It's cognition, it's emotions, it's things that you don't need to tell, but you just see them. And while I was thinking about it, I was guessing if you could talk about these formats like cooperatives or any other projects where people get together and try to find other ways to enrich themselves in order to get to producing films and get to rent equipment or other things. And as myself talking about the web series Polyglot, I'm really inspired by that, and really happy that you made it accessible on YouTube, because it allowed me to reach into a world that I wouldn't see. And this is actually, I think, also a power that we have with YouTube and other parts of film showing. So if you can also talk about that, these video on demands or other ones, that I'm not so interested talking about the power and that how we cannot access, but what is actually there, all these possibilities. Thank you.
Well, it's a very good question, because I don't know what's especially like video on demand. Oddly enough, I don't use it that often myself. Like, I'm too used to free stuff. I don't know. When Polyglot came out, some people reached out, who wanted to do to embed it in that kind of model of streaming, or but it never it never worked out with the ones who were interested. And it's also, I think it depends, because it never was the intention, or we never had in mind that it could be something that we could make money of. And it really, on YouTube, it's quite hard actually to make money. You get €1, I think, for every 1,000 clips. So far we've probably made 100 euros. So yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people do the product placement stuff if it's on YouTube, that you kind of that you go more into the product placement. But I really don't know what's Oliver might probably know more about it. No. Yeah. Well, that's it. What was the other question? Sorry. Okay. I think the 5D, the Canon 5D was a huge revolution. I think so much, we shot the whole series with the 5D marks, and even my other short film like that, because it was also because of shooting in Kigali, you don't get that many cameras. There's most of the cameras are 5Ds, and then there are some really great cameras, but they are also in the hands of the like one is at the German embassy, but you have no access to it. So it's like when the cameras and the equipment that's in the country is very limited to like black magic and 5D. So and also because of like insurance policies and stuff, it's really difficult to like use expensive equipment that's not from the country, that you have to kind of, with the taxes and everything. So you're kind of limited to using those, the available material. And also in Goma, that's also what we did. They had 4 5Ds and then IMAX that were also funded by some Belgian corporation. So, but I think like nowadays a lot of what I see in Rwanda a lot is that one person buys a camera and then they kind of rent it out to people who shoot weddings and stuff like that, and then slowly pay off that camera. But then also really like the insurance stuff is a big problem, because like it can get lost, stolen all the time. It happens all the time, but you can't get any insurance for it. So I think that's a very big challenge, because most of the time when expensive equipment comes into the country, it comes through an organization that then can decide who gets to use it depending on whatever criteria they come up with. So I think that's a huge challenge actually in Rwanda.
I can try and give an example for the chain of distribution in one case of my work. We made a film called The United States of Hoodoo, which was about kind of a road movie through the United States, looking after how West African spiritual forms have informed American everyday culture, in one sentence, okay? And this was also a German production. It was a co-production. We had money from again from Arte, but we also had some regional film funds and so on. And it was a film made for cinema also with TV money. So we had a cinema appearance. It was like in 2012. It was like in maybe 20 cinemas throughout Germany with not many spectators, I have to say. But it was July, it was very hot. So, but afterwards, we were thinking about how to get this film into the US market, which is really a challenge. But that was kind of the beginning of all these video on demand. Well, yeah, it was still kind of the beginning. And there were these, they're called aggregators. These are firms who specialize on distributing these films digitally. That means they are kind of intermediaries between you and iTunes, Hulu, you name it. And this kind of worked out quite well. They started it, and it's now the film is now available on like 20 or 25 platforms, and I'm still getting like it's not much money, but I'm still getting every 3 months just money from it. They have a revenue split, like I think they keep 30% and 70 goes to the production company or to the director, depends on. Yeah, so even after 5 years, I'm still getting like $200 or $300 every 3 months from them, and this, at least at that time, was really a great solution, especially for a film that is really special interest film. Yeah, but they managed it actually to get it on all platforms except iTunes. I don't know why, but doesn't matter. So it's there everywhere, also on free platforms where it's funded through advertisement and so on. But that seemed at that time a really good model. I don't know exactly how it is today, if there are like maybe thousands of it now, and if it still works that way. Because the development is really quite fast. I think with Netflix as a really powerful player, the landscape will totally change again.
Yeah, it's working. You mentioned something very interesting. I live in America, I work there. So for us, it's much easier to get equipment. It's cheap, it's accessible, it's available. There are so many different places we can go to. We can either rent or loan fantastic quality. But when it comes to distribution, there's a wall as thick as the world. We can't penetrate into anything that can help us distribute. And I feel like perhaps I should return back to Europe or just create something that in Europe can be distributed. Even working with Hulu is it functions completely differently under the American contractual, not copyright, they have something else that I can't get my head around it. And also, if a film I produced a film in India years ago, I can't at all distribute it in America. It's been there. It's been sitting there in my archive, and I can't do much about it. So American market is something else than the European market at large. However, I have noticed that when a film is produced with Arte, for instance, in America, there's always a way, in Europe, there's always a way to create some sort of sponsorship to bring it in for limited viewing. PBS, for instance, is doing a lot. It's very little in the American culture, but it's doing a lot to bring some Arte-produced or BBC-produced or even ITV-produced material to America. I don't know how you work with that. Have you thought about reaching out to America? Because that's a huge audience. And it's a lack of wealth, of great culture in so many ways, in so many areas in it. If you have any suggestions.
I haven't distributed any films so far. Like they've gone to festivals in America, and so it's true that there's a bigger niche audience in the US, I think, for my type of content than there is in Europe. But to be honest, I haven't figured out yet how to get to the monetary part of it. Like so far, it's been about more making a name for myself, having the film go through, be in festivals and be seen in certain spaces in order to finance the next one. So that's like the stage I'm in at this moment. Like I haven't yet, gotten to that stage yet. But so I'm completely clueless. But it's an interesting question, and it's definitely one that will come up at some point.
Well, the example I've been talking about before was about America, right? Yeah. So there seems to be a way, and as far as I know, for example, for the things you are doing, there are highly specialized video-on-demand platforms. I know one. It's called Afro TV. It's not a really original name, but it's there. It seems to be quite powerful. And then there's one called Kweli TV. It's based in DC, I think. And there are several that are really looking for this really highly specialized content for small, and in the US it's not even a small community, but they are like community-based video-on-demand platforms that seems to work very well, as far as I can say it from here. But it exists, yeah, and it makes that makes absolutely sense, of course, in the US, where you have like huge immigrant population, or the population of the African diaspora. It's huge. So it makes sense also in from an economical point of view. So I think there's still hope. There's a huge audience for this. Pardon?
For your film as well.
and we're working hard on it. No, you're right, absolutely. Yeah.
Before we finish, I wanted to also ask about the debut feature film that you're working on, and sort of both where you're at in that process, and in terms of how have you been moving towards, either are you at the point of looking for a producer or looking for funding, and how you're situated in that, and how, whether you're leaning on a sort of German funding organizations, or basically where you're at with that.
I found it so far. I'm still like in development. I'm writing the script at the moment, and since it's a film that's set in Belgium, and so I have a Belgian production company attached and a producer from Congo Brazzaville. So like with the feature films, I found it easier to ask for money, like as an African filmmaker, more than as a European filmmaker. So I do go for the fundings that are specifically for African filmmakers, and it's been easier that way. And it's kind of, it's always difficult because you're putting it, I don't want to put myself in this niche position, but it is easier to kind of go that way. And it's also it's not even, I feel sometimes like I'm cheating because so many people are applying for that money, and sometimes I feel like, okay, I'm coming from the European side but applying for money that is meant for people on the continent. But then at the same time, I know that with the topics that I do want to make films about, I won't be considered in the funding that is more mainstream or regional. Also, I'm not planning to make a film Germany, so now I'm going more for that kind of funding, and it's going to be set in Belgium. I'm going to be shooting in Belgium, and it's more. So yeah, that's the way I'm going right now. Yeah, and it's in French as well. So yeah.
So are there any last comments or questions from amongst yourselves from the panel? Yeah.
Yeah, I think also to follow your footsteps, to sum up a bit, I think it's really we're really a little bit trapped in the way that we are able to sustain ourselves through funding or through even commercial models, and I think that we have to become more loud and clear about the fact that we shouldn't be put in a position like yours, for example, where you're a filmmaker and you kind of have to play a certain role in order to get the money, and at the same time you feel morally uncomfortable because you don't know if you take away opportunities for others, and it shouldn't be like this at all. Like the way that funding bodies should act, I think, is not in this kind of post-colonial way anymore, really. Just a little thought at the end.
Fair enough. Is there a last question or comment from the audience then? Yeah. Okay, one last thing from Abhishek.
Thank you all for coming again. I just want to ask you, just very simple, how has technology enabled or affected your work from how the same work would have been done before? As not just in film production, of course in exhibition also, but also in terms of how it reaches audience beyond or networks beyond what you know, or what would have been possible, what wouldn't have been possible without technology.
I think I wouldn't even be doing film if it wasn't for digital cameras, and so it has changed a lot. For example, I don't know. I've realized today, thinking about the talk and everything, that my work has been shown at places that I've never set foot in, programmed by people I've never met and that I've never met in real life, and so it's really it makes everything actually so much easier and even possible. It wouldn't have been possible without in another time. Just money-wise, it wouldn't have been able to produce a web series with no funding. It would have never like I would have never been able to kind of crack a program in order to learn editing. Like all that kind of stuff is just before you couldn't do it without like technology being so accessible. So in all stages of the production, it has been it wouldn't have been able to do it in another time, for me at least.
So, like, first of all, I couldn't have built Wolf where Wolf is, because we have like 50-seat screen and a 40-seat screen and a cafe bar area, and above the bar we have the projector. Normally you have a projection booth, but we're maybe one of the first cinemas here that don't have a projection booth, but the projector is actually in a box above the bar and above the corridor for the other screen. And we have another third space where we do flexible projections. So this is where we do analog stuff, but we also have a foil on the window that's going to the street, the shop window. Is it gone or no? And we do back projection onto that foil. So like we project left, right, and center wherever we can, and we couldn't have done that without the digital. And the connections that we have with other venues and filmmakers and it's sort of like film community anywhere in the world wouldn't be possible. So none of what we do would be possible without the digital. And at the same time, I feel we need to become more local again. Like what me, like in advance of coming here, I've been thinking sort of more about the community and neighborhood and space issues, and something that I would love to develop is a community project like they have done with Union Docks in New York, and Los Sures is like a really interesting project that they dug up an old film that was shot in the neighborhood, and then they met the different characters that still live in the neighborhood, and it has become a huge archival process, and it's something that is kind of analog, but it's also digital, and it's tying the neighborhood together through cinema, through film, through archive, through all of that, through reworking history. They have listening and storytelling sessions where they rework what happened in the film and what is where the people are now, and like it's endless possibilities on how you can continue storytelling through the digital. That's really inspiring and really great.
Thank you. And so thank you all for coming. And I just wanted to say that we also have a bit of a reception that'll be I don't know if it's ready already, but soon. We'll be in the bar. And of course we have drinks there as well for sale. And yeah, thank you for coming. What? Oh. Yeah, because this is also part of our finissage program. So please enjoy the reception, drinks, and maybe come with us for drinks later. Thank you for coming.